So they're live at Balmoral. We can go now to Mark Easton, who is outside Buckingham Palace for us. Now, Mark, we were seeing a little bit earlier some of the pictures of the crowds gathered where you are, many of them having been there in the rain throughout much of the day on the news that the Queen was gravely ill, and now many more people have turned up on the news that she has now passed away.
Yes, absolutely, Clyde. People are seeking some way of connecting with this extraordinary moment in British history. And despite the rain, which is really quite heavy now, there are tens of thousands of people outside Buckingham Palace. The crowd has been growing over the last few hours, people streaming down the Mall. In the Mall as well, we've got a line of black taxi cabs, the cabbies wanting to pay their tribute. It's a very respectful, very sombre scene. You'll see quite a few camera lights are on. But I've also heard applause, and even at one point 3 cheers. Now, we don't know whether those were moments where the crowd wanted to show their appreciation for the Queen that they had lost, or whether they were perhaps greeting their new king, King Charles III. But whichever, it is a crowd which wants to be part of this moment. And it is a huge moment, I think, Clive, for this country, because the Queen was this solid, immovable piece of the nation's architecture, the keystone. And without that, there will be a sense, I think, of unease, of uncertainty. And it is in a moment when people will want to come together, will want to be with others, to share this moment and to see it through.
Mark, thank you. Mark Easton there at Buckingham Palace this evening, where crowds have gathered and have been gathering throughout the day. If you are just joining us, Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the longest serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom, and a commanding presence, of course, in British public life over 8 decades. Her Majesty died at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire, and she was aged 96. The Queen's eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has now become king. Our royal correspondent, Daniela Ralph, now looks back on today's events.
Tuesday, the 6th of September, the last photographs of the Queen, 96 years old and still at work. Meeting the new Prime Minister at Balmoral, a duty she had been keen to fulfil, and one we now know was her final duty after 7 decades of public service. Around 4 o'clock this afternoon, a number of the Queen's family arrived at Aberdeen Airport. Her grandson, the Duke of Cambridge, was first to emerge, followed by her daughter-in-law, Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, and then her 2 youngest sons, Edward, the Earl of Wessex, and Andrew, the Duke of York. Prince William drove the family group to Balmoral to join his father, the Prince of Wales, Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall, and Princess Anne, who were already there with the Queen. Within an hour and a half of their arrival came news from Buckingham Palace. As is tradition, the announcement of the Queen's death was attached to the palace gates by 2 footmen, as tributes began.
Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign. She was the very spirit of Great Britain, and that spirit will endure. She has been our longest ever reigning monarch. It's an extraordinary achievement to have presided with such dignity and grace for 70 years. And with the passing of the second Elizabethan age, we usher in a new era in the magnificent history of our great country, exactly as Her Majesty would have wished, by saying the words, "God save the King."
And also from the Leader of the Opposition.
For the vast majority of us, the late Queen has been simply the Queen, the only Queen. Above all else, our Queen. As we mourn her loss, we should also treasure her life our longest serving and greatest ever monarch. Above the clashes of politics, she stood not for what the nation fought over, but what it agreed upon.
Throughout the day, there had been growing unease about the Queen's health. In the Commons, as Keir Starmer stood up to speak, opposite him, the Prime Minister was being told of the Queen's condition. Information passed to Angela Rayner, Labour's deputy leader, who left her seat for a while to discuss the development, before the Speaker of the House addressed the chamber.
I know I speak on behalf of the entire House when I say that we send our best wishes to Her Majesty the Queen, and that she and the royal family are in our thoughts and prayers at this moment.
Cheered by onlookers, one of the Queen's last royal engagements was in July, with her daughter, Princess Anne, opening a new state-of-the-art hospice in Berkshire. But these kind of visits had become rare over the past year, as the Queen relied on her walking stick, her mobility compromised. The royal household had tried to adapt to keep her active and visible. A golf buggy at the Chelsea Flower Show helped keep the Queen comfortable. But she had become noticeably thinner and frailer, something that severely limited her involvement in her own Platinum Jubilee celebrations, with her family increasingly representing her. At the weekend, her son stood in at the Braemar Highland Games, always a favourite event for the Queen that she reluctantly missed. Like so much of her life, the decline in her health was played out in public. Duty may have got harder to manage physically, but mentally, even emotionally, the Queen remained engaged and working to the very end.
Daniela, Ralph, with a sum up there of the events of the day. We're now joined by the former Conservative Prime Minister, Sir John Major. Sir John, it's very good of you to join us here on BBC News. At this moment in time, fears, of course, had been mounting throughout the day on the news from the Queen's medical team at Balmoral. What are your thoughts now on the passing of Her Majesty?
Well, it is heartbreaking news. It's news that one day we knew we would have, but we always hoped it would be delayed and would be somewhere away. It's very hard to take it in, that radiant smile which lights up a room and lights up a country is just not going to be live for us there anymore. Very hard to imagine. Most of the people in this country can remember nothing other than the Queen as monarch. Many of those who are elderly remember faintly the former king. But this is an enormous change for this country. It's a very big moment in history, a key pivotal moment. And I think there will be many tears shed tonight and over the next few days for Her Majesty the Queen.
I wonder, Sir John, given your interactions with the Queen, obviously as Prime Minister, what your personal recollections are of meeting her?
There are so many recollections, and in many ways so different from what people might imagine. The private meetings that the Prime Minister has with the Queen, which are perhaps scheduled for 45 minutes, in my experience never lasted remotely under an hour, and often some way beyond it, which weren't entirely serious matters, just discussing the matters of the nation. There was a great deal of amusement in them, there was a great deal of humour in them, there was a bit of gossip in them. And apart from that, the serious matters that were discussed, I think people would have been extraordinarily surprised if they realised the depth of information the Queen had about the lives of people in every conceivable part of the United Kingdom. She was always extraordinarily well briefed. And on foreign affairs, of course, she would often say, if there was a difficulty of a foreign leader, well, I met him many years ago, or even I knew his father. There was always a wise word to be had. And those meetings with the Queen were one of the better parts of her Prime Minister's week.
I mean, that stability, that continuity that she brought, not just to the monarchy, I suppose, but to all of our lives, on being on the throne over such a long period. What are your thoughts on that now that she's passed?
Well, the continuity was very important, but I think there were other things as well. The example, the duty, the selflessness, the way in which other people were put first, the way in which she handled crisis with great stoicism when they occurred, as they occurred a number of times during her reign. They were all examples to people about how to behave in their own lives and examples for our country. And what you found going around the world is that the Queen was the face of the United Kingdom. When people around the world spoke of the Queen, they actually meant our Queen. That was the status she had in every part of the world. It was truly remarkable.
So John, you talked about the stoicism she showed in times of crisis. We think back, of course, to 1992 and her Annus Horribilis speech, the fire at Windsor Castle as well. Her fortitude in dealing with those issues and those problems was something that the British people came to admire greatly in her, along with that sense of duty.
I think they were right to admire it. I sat along from her when she made the Annus Horribilis speech in 1992. A great deal had gone wrong, and there was, as you say, that dreadful fire in Windsor Castle, which many people didn't receive with the sympathy perhaps they should have done. But the Queen understood that. She put her head down and she quietly, silently, uncomplainingly got on with her job. There are very few people who would have handled it with the aplomb that she did. And I think that was in part because of her experience and in part because of her natural nature. She knew what one had to do to be a monarch. She knew when to keep out of controversy. She knew when to advise in private. She was almost faultless in the way in which she conducted the monarchy. And she leaves behind the monarchy in very good shape and a son who's been brought up to follow in precisely the same footsteps as King Charles III.
I wondered too, Sir John, about the affection with which she was held right around the world, particularly within the Commonwealth. And you travelled and you've seen the great affection that she had, and there will be millions across the globe now who will be particularly sad today.
Well, I have seen that affection at close quarters. Some 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I was invited by the Queen to set up and chair the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Trust, a charity to commemorate her 60 years on the throne. And we raised money from across the Commonwealth, and I asked the Queen what she wished us to do with the money that we had raised in her name. And she gave us two tasks. The first was to cure avoidable blindness across the whole of the Commonwealth, and the second was to seek out young Commonwealth leaders in every nation of the Commonwealth, 54 at the time, and help prepare them for leadership roles in later life. It was entirely a selfless request on her behalf and entirely typical of her.
Remarkable. Sir John Major, thank you very much indeed for giving us your reflections on Queen Elizabeth II, who passed away today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to go to Buckingham Palace. There we are, live pictures there, the lights lining up the front, and crowds of people. A bit difficult to make out, but you can see the odd umbrella there, the rain still coming down, flashlights from people taking pictures, and of course the press gathered there. And we're thinking around about a few hundred people, possibly even more, on the news that the Queen has died. That notice from Buckingham Palace announcing the news posted around about 6:40, 6:45 today, I think. The official announcement coming from Buckingham Palace that the Queen had died came just after 6:30, and it was after a RAF plane arrived on the tarmac at Aberdeenshire Airport to take members of the royal family to the Queen's bedside at Balmoral Castle. And these still the scenes, and you can see we've got a bit more light there now. You can see how many people have gathered. Quite a few, even with the rain pouring down there. Many people wanting to pay their respects. Many people fearing the worst, of course, after that rather alarming bulletin from the Queen's medical team coming out of.
It's happened so quickly.
I mean, she was 96 years old. You must have seen this coming.
I know, and we know that she was getting frail. But all of a sudden, she had Liz Truss on Tuesday, and today she's gone.
and she looked great on Tuesday.
She looked amazing on Tuesday.
So it's just happened so quickly.
Sorry for
I
your
live in
loss.
London, so it was just...
We just happened to be here today.
Yeah, but she's
shopping.
always been our queen.
Of course.
And so...
Since I was a little girl, there was Queen Elizabeth.
Thank you for
Thank
talking to us.
you.
Thank you for
Thank
talking. I'm just
you.
going to sort of wander through the crowd here if I can, Jake, and talk to a couple of people. I'm just wondering what you think of maybe a potential King Charles.
Oh, I don't know really. Just a bit, I don't know, I'm on the spot, I have no idea.
Well, how are you feeling right now about the passing of Queen Elizabeth II?
Really sad, isn't it? It's really sad and just a bit shocking. It's really quick, happened really quickly.
Ma'am, just quickly, why did you brought flowers here today?
Because the Queen has died and we all love the Queen, and we've lived in Windsor for a long time and it's very emotional, so I wanted to pay some respects to the Queen.
What does the Queen mean to you personally?
She's been here all my life. All my life the Queen's been here, and lots of people here will be in the same position. It will be very, very, very difficult being without her. We all loved her very much.
Sorry for your loss. You know, Jake, what's remarkable to see, sort of as we snake our way through the crowd here, is just how genuinely emotional people are getting over a woman that they mostly have never met. And you can see there's people just continuing to come fill up this area, despite the fact that the police would rather people go elsewhere, a little bit further away from the castle, but people just want to be here. I mean, this is the residence that the Queen is usually at. Ma'am, how are you feeling right now? How are you feeling right now, ma'am? You're live on CNN.
Hi, I'm Carol from South Africa.
Yeah?
I just came to pay tribute to the Queen. It's very emotional.
What does she mean for you as a member of the Commonwealth?
My mum was a royalist, so I inherited her love of the Queen and the family. So I'm very emotional about it. Yeah.
Are you here on vacation or you live here?
I'm working at the BMW PGA Championship, the golf tournament. They actually close it tomorrow for respect out of the Queen.
Wow.
And they're going to start again on Saturday.
Sorry for your loss. We'll let you
Thank you.
get on with it. And sorry, Jake, I'll just continue to...
Paying their respects outside the building. Well, as we've been hearing, our new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, has led the tributes to Queen Elizabeth, saying she was loved and admired by people around the world, and describing her as the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our political editor, Chris Mason, is in Downing Street now. Chris, we know that there was a discussion in Parliament today over the appalling cost of living crisis. That news and that debate overshadowed by the situation concerning the Queen. And I wonder now, given the stability that the Queen not only brought to the rest of British society, but also to the political life of this country, that is now sadly gone.
It has, Clive, yeah, and I think what we witnessed at lunchtime, caught in a moment, the very nature of the British Constitution, the way that we are governed, because there in the House of Commons was a debate ongoing where the House of Commons does what it is famous for, that it is the fulcrum of our democracy, it is the fulcrum and apex of angry argument to determine how we are governed. And there was that passionate argument going on about this whole huge and profound issue of energy bills, the government setting out its programme, the opposition criticising it, and then the passage of messages along the line, along the two front benches, from a government minister to the deputy leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, the leader, was on his feet at the time, and also to the Prime Minister. And you could tell, watching the chamber, you could tell the gravity of the news that was being passed on some 8 or 9 hours ago at lunchtime. The senior politicians learned of the deteriorating health of the Queen. We've seen and heard, haven't we, in the conversation you just had with Sir John Major, the reflections of senior politicians on the value that they attached to their conversations with the Queen. The nature of that constitutional settlement I was talking about, meaning that the Queen is, if you like, plugged into democracy, but stands above it. And through that mechanism of the weekly audiences, Prime Ministers, 15 in total, Liz Truss only having that one audience with the Queen, that moment 48 hours ago when she became Prime Minister, having the chance every week to go and see the Queen in private and tap into what David Cameron, one of her Prime Ministers, her 12th Prime Minister, saying this evening was the world's greatest public servant and the world's most experienced diplomat, tapping into that wisdom and counsel, knowing whatever advice was offered would be done so privately.
Okay.